So let's just talk for a minute about what we mean by this intelligent content thing. At MarkLogic, we know that 80 to 90%, depending on who you believe, of the information in the enterprise is not contained in databases, and it's not contained in transactional data stores. It's actually contained in lumps of information that are very, very difficult for machines to process and usually require a human to read a piece of paper and understand what it's about. And so what we do at MarkLogic is we have actually devoted ourselves to helping people leverage the human intelligence that is available in the 80 to 90% of the information in your enterprise, which is being woefully underused right now. And we're not the only people who think this. My former employer is a little company called Gartner, and Gartner actually came out with a prediction in, I want to say, 2012, that basically said that companies that manage to integrate new and diverse data types and new and diverse information types into their information management infrastructures will enjoy a competitive advantage of about 20% above others in their market. So it's not just us that believes that the value of the information and the intelligence that's in your content is important. It's also some of the big dogs in the industry that do as well. And we usually start talking about this by saying, you know, we have this fairy tale. And the fairy tale starts like this. It says, once upon a time there was paper. People used to do business on paper. They would send stuff in the mail. Eventually they graduated to fax machines, so you would come in the morning and there would be orders on your fax machine of people who had written out, you know, I want 20 of this and 40 of that and 120 of the other thing. And then we would create invoices and send them by fax or through the mail. And this was how business got done. And it worked very well for a long time, but then somewhere in the 1970s, somebody, or 1950s or 60s, somebody came up with a really bright idea that they could take a very small part of that information and put it into a format that would allow computers to process it so that transactions could be automated and that people could do things in a more efficient and effective way. And that thing was called a hierarchical database, and it was really a very big leap forward. But it had some issues. Number one was that in order to understand the information, you actually had to go and gin up a COBOL programmer from somewhere to tell you what the structure of the data was and what it meant. And so it was efficient, but not particularly effective. And then at some point in time, about 20 or 30 years later, somebody came up with the bright idea that we could take that information, that 20% of the information in the enterprise, and we could actually make it self-describing. And then you had this thing called the relational database. And what's good about relational databases is that you don't have to have one particular program that knows what the data means. You can actually ask the SQL database, you can say, tell me what your data structure is, and it will tell you bytes 1 through 20 are the customer number, and that's alphanumeric, and bytes 21 through 46 are the customer's first name, and so on and so forth. And so now you have the ability to allow multiple programs working off of the same information, but it still had some pretty significant limitations because you were tied to a particular schema. You actually had to know what questions you wanted to answer before you could actually design the information structure. But it was a great leap forward for the time, and it actually led to an explosion of innovation in what today is probably a $40 billion market of things that we call data warehouses and business intelligence. And then the next great leap forward after that was this thing that we call post-relational databases, schemaless databases, databases where you actually do not have to presuppose the questions that you're going to ask in order to find and utilize the information, but you're still only dealing with 10 to 20% of the information in the enterprise. So what was happening to the 80 to 90% in the meantime? Well, for a long time it stayed on paper. And then one day we electronified the paper and we put things in file shares. And then we kind of got into an evolutionary dead end around image management systems, where we would take pictures of the paper and we would put it on, electronic storage. And then, we kind of had problems finding things, so we invented enterprise search to go over the top of this, but search itself is fundamentally hierarchical. It looks for specific words, it looks for specific structures, but if you want it to find information for you, you actually have to go and find yourself a programmer who's going to insert new algorithms in your search engine and so on and so forth. And then we invented content management systems. Who has looked at a content management system lately? Anybody? Okay. Are they still comprised of file drawers and folders and hierarchical structures? Who can find the stuff that they need in their enterprise content management system in their business? Anybody? You can find the stuff that you need? Come and see me after, because I want to know how you do it.
Well, we are using MarkLogic, and I am developing the CMS.
Ah! All right, Joe will pay you after the session. That's taken care of. Give the man a hoodie. All right. So really, we're still kind of bumbling along in this hierarchical structure with a great deal of difficulty finding information. And the thing that we've done at MarkLogic, at SmartLogic, is we have actually made the content self-describing. We have given people the ability to actually interrogate documents, interrogate unstructured information, extract all of the things that are of interest to you, and append them as metadata, or to extract them and store them as triples, so that you actually have the ability to leverage the human intelligence that is in your content. And that is a thing that we call content intelligence, and that is an evolutionary leap forward, which is actually very similar to the evolutionary leap that we went through when we moved from hierarchical structures to relational structures, and then from relational structures to post-relational structures. Those things come along about once every 30 years. And what you get now, that you have the content self-describing and the data self-describing, is the ability to manage all of the information in your enterprise under a single semantic umbrella. And that opens up tremendously powerful capabilities that companies who embrace this kind of idea can actually use for competitive advantage in the future. And we're going to talk about several examples of how that works. So I'm from Gartner originally, and at Gartner we define things. So one of the first things I did when I got to SmartLogic was I said we need to have a definition for content intelligence, and it needs to be short. And this is what it is. It is the combination of technology and information science. There has to be the ability to build a model of your problem domain so that you can describe the content in a way which is relevant to you and what it is that you're trying to accomplish. It needs to be information in context, and the context that you have may be different from the context that somebody else has. And what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to build a model of the problem domain. We want to be able to use that model to derive the rules. We want to interpret the rules so that we can derive We want to interpret the model so that we can derive the rules that will allow us to extract the right entities, the right facts, the right metadata in order to be able to describe the content properly. And then we can start analyzing the content, and we can start visualizing the content, And we can do all kinds of things with that 80% of the information which are equally powerful, if not more powerful, to what we've been able to do with the 20% of information that everybody's been consumed with up till now. And we do that with components called ontology server for managing the ontology, a rules base that actually automatically derives the rules from the model, classification server which does the descriptions, advanced language packs which do a lot of the analytics, and semantic enhancement server which provides the visualization capabilities. So in the many more years that I'm going to admit to any of you that I've been doing this stuff, I have never found a single business person who has been willing to write a check because I wanted to make the data prettier. So we talk about what are the use cases for doing this? What does it do for me from a business perspective if I now have well-described content that I can actually use in my business? Well, I can automate business processes which are content intensive and therefore manual. They cost a lot of money, they're very, very prone to error. I can augment the business intelligence and big data projects that I'm running with the insight from that 80% of the information that is currently going unused. I can do harmonization. I can bring information together from many, many different disparate sources. We're going to talk about that when we get to you. All right, Thomson Reuters. You can actually invent new revenue streams because you now have ways of presenting this information to people based on their interests and their contexts. You can find stuff. IDC, who I don't often quote, but sometimes I do, IDC actually did a study a number of years ago in which they discovered that people were spending a good 20% of their time looking for stuff that they needed to do their jobs. In other words, if you had 100 people, in order to get 100 people's worth of work, you had to have 120 people. That's crazy. And you can secure sensitive content, you can do information governance better. There's a whole host of things that you can do that Toby is going to talk about now.
Thank you, Anne. Afternoon. Okay, so you might be thinking that this is really bleeding and nobody's quite doing this yet. But actually we have hundreds of customers that are using content intelligence and semantics to solve real business problems. And what I want to do now is just talk you through 6 different stories from half a dozen different industries, just to illustrate some of the points that Anne was making about the kinds of problems that have been solved. So the first organization is actually Disney. Disney has literally millions of media assets, right, which are fundamental to their business. And because of the complicated processes in production and post-production, monetization and distribution of these media assets through movies and TV series, through parks and toys, and all these other business lines for them, they necessarily have multiple different systems. So those media assets are distributed around all of these different systems. And that creates some big problems, right? So it's very difficult for somebody within Disney to find out, exactly where a media asset is, where it is in the process, and all of the information that you might need to know about that media asset in order to take it to the next step or monetize it or do something new with it. So Disney set about to build a new platform which would give people instant access to all the media assets that Disney has. And realizing the number of different business lines, the number of different systems, the number of different ways in which they monetize an asset throughout the process, they realized just how many relationships exist within the organization, and therefore the number of relationships that actually exist within the data. So it made very natural sense for Disney to deploy a semantic platform to be able to describe all of these assets and the relationships that exist between them in a meaningful way. So Disney went out to the market and evaluated the different platforms that were available. And they chose SmartLogic and they chose MarkLogic, not just because they rhyme, but because they provided, a really great platform for being able to integrate all of this different data together. So they use an ontology to describe the important things they need to capture in this data, right? So a TV series has episodes, an episode has characters, characters have actors, actors play different characters in different TV series, a media asset is in different formats and different languages. And so all of that's described in an ontology. And then that ontology is used to bring in data from all of these different media asset management systems into what Disney called CNRG, what we would call a metadata hub, a single place that describes everything that exists out there on the network. And so now Disney's able to search for any particular facet and find all of the media assets which are relevant for that search. So instant access for Disney's users to be able to access any media asset and everything that they need to know about it, regardless of what system it's implemented in. And by combining Semaphore and MarkLogic's search capabilities, they're able to deliver a truly semantic search experience. So to support the creative processes in Disney, they're able to navigate through all of these relationships, to go and see, all the different places that a character might appear in all the different movies, episodes, theme parks, etc., etc. So it's given them a way of really making it much faster for people to find and monetize those assets, and to be able to support these creative processes, and to be able to interact with their business partners through the production and post-production processes. So that's what Disney have been doing. Monsanto is our next case study. Now, Monsanto spends enormous resources researching and developing new products which it intends to bring to market, okay? And if ever there was a data-driven business, it's Monsanto, right? They have, thousands of scientists generating literally petabytes of data about products. But again, because Monsanto moves from developing and researching new products in the lab, where things are done on a very small scale, through to taking those into bigger or smaller manufacturing processes to be able to develop small quantities to evaluate and test and run trials. And then when things are successful, to scale up to large-scale manufacturing processes that whilst they're making the same product, they're using different manufacturing equipment, different operating procedures and processes to produce those particular products. There's a huge amount of data being created from that, and the need to try and move through that process as quickly as possible. You either need to fail very quickly because something's not going to work, or you need to be able to get through to the end of the process very efficiently and maintain quality all the way through that process. So Monsanto's using, again, the combination of our product Semaphore and MarkLogic to be able to bring together data from all of the different silos that support everything from the lab management systems at the small end of the scale through to the manufacturing and supply chain systems being used for large-scale manufacturing, quality control, supplier management, and distribution of the products. Now, Monsanto in the life sciences industry faces those same challenges in harmonizing data that all its other peers do. And so the life sciences industry, like many other industries, has done the work to standardize vocabularies, to create an ontology for the industry that describes everything that an organization like Monsanto would need to be able to describe. So whether they're describing a chemical, a gene, a product, process, an operating procedure, a unit of measure, they're using a standardized vocabulary. So firstly, for Monsanto, that allows them to combine together data from all of these different systems that all have their own vocabulary, their own way of describing something, bring it together into MarkLogic in a way that harmonizes that data to a standard vocabulary. So data looks the same wherever it comes from. Equally, Monsanto can extend that out to its business partners and other places where research happens, right? So they can leverage all of that information from partners, they can streamline processes across the supply chain and take advantage of research in order to do everything much more effectively. So they're able to accelerate the life cycle of products through the manufacturing and out to distribution. They're able to save scientists weeks compiling information from lots of different sources and get that down to hours. They're able to automate the compliance processes for pushing information out, and they're able to increase collaboration both within and beyond the enterprise by bringing this data together. So our next example is with Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters is the leading provider of information on the planet, and it's providing critical data to professionals in financial services, in legal, in science. And so over the years, Thomson Reuters has gathered literally millions of data points, which it provides to its customers. And the truth of the matter is that Thomson Reuters has many different systems where all these data items exist. And particularly as Thomson Reuters has grown through a lot of acquisitions, it's picked up lots of different systems. You may see some of the same things happening in your organization, right? Especially if you've been involved in M&A. So in a perfect world, wouldn't it be fantastic just to retire all of those systems and build a brand new system where all the data is in one place, and importantly where all the data is described in a really sort of useful and meaningful way. But it might be a little bit expensive to do that. It might be a little bit risky to retire all those business critical systems when you've got millions of customers relying on them every day. So what Thomson Reuters are doing instead is to create a data atlas, something that describes every data point and makes it available so that when developers are building new versions of the products, when they see an opportunity in the market for a new product and want to develop that quickly, or generally respond to the demands of customers, they don't have to pore through millions of fields described in lots of different systems in one long list, trying to work out which is the field they want and how are they going to deploy it into an interface. So by building this data atlas and using MarkLogic, they're able to bring all these data points together. So just in the way that Disney, their assets were media assets, TV episodes, for Thomson Reuters, those same things are data assets, and they need to be described and they need to be categorized. So using natural language processing, we're running through all of the metadata for every single data field in order to organize all those data fields into hierarchies. So now it's easy for developers to drill through those hierarchy of fields to find just the field that they need to solve a particular problem, to see all the metadata that describes that field and its lineage, and then to be able to use that to build front ends much more quickly, as if all of that data was just in one system. That's what the data atlas is providing to us. So it's accelerating their product development a lot. It's giving new life to old systems. And it's also actually that same functionality is now being provided to customers so that those customers can much more quickly build reports and analytics over the underlying data, because it's much easier to work out what all the fields are and which ones they actually need. So this next example is for KPMG. They have they've recognized an opportunity to create a whole new business, what they see as actually a multi-billion-dollar business, enabling banks to outsource key compliance processes to KPMG. And they're able to do that because the power of semantics and content intelligence allows them to process this stuff much more efficiently than the banks are doing today. So if you're an investment bank and you want to onboard a new customer, you have to comply with a whole set of regulations which vary somewhat all around the world. So you have to show that you know your customer. You have to prove that your customer is not using you as a way of laundering money. And you have to prove that your customer is not trying to evade tax. So in order to comply with all these regulations, every time you onboard a customer, you have to ask them for hundreds of different documents which ensure that you're a bona fide customer to be doing business with. And so all these documents come in by mail or by fax, and paralegals have to go through 100-page articles of incorporation for the company. They have to pile through shareholder tables, pulling out who the directors are, where they're domiciled, and how many shares they own. And then they have to cross-reference that with all the other data to make sure that these people are relevant. So it's a very slow and painful process involving a lot of unstructured content that looks different every time. So what KPMG is doing is saying, let us take care of that. And they're using content intelligence to analyze these documents and fingerprint them. In other words, what kind of document is this? So the ontology tells us how to identify a document. And having identified that document, it tells us what things do we need to know from that document? What are the 120 data points we need to extract out of that document? And how do we do it? And so the natural language processing takes care of that, extracts all that data, creates them as triples and puts them into MarkLogic. And then by compiling all of the documents to onboard that customer, all of those data points can be cross-referenced. Where data's missing, where it doesn't compare correctly, or where it seems to show something suspicious, then that creates a workflow where somebody can evaluate and see the right parts of the document to identify what it is that seems to be wrong about this particular process. So for KPMG, this creates a new multi-billion-dollar business servicing its customers in financial services. For the banks, it reduces the risk that they're going to face $1 billion plus fine, as has happened. It allows them to onboard their customers much more quickly and therefore improve the quality of service. And it allows them to then extract all of that reference data and feed it into their banking systems, their CRM systems, and anything else, thereby improving the quality of their own data. So just a couple of other quick case studies. This is one of the world's leading or largest pharmaceutical companies. And pharmaceutical companies have to report any adverse events that happen from the use of their drugs anywhere around the world. But this information comes in completely free format, okay? So any physician or clinician anywhere around the world could submit a report saying that a particular patient had an adverse event to a particular drug. And so in today's processes, those documents have to be reviewed manually. All of the salient information needs to be pulled out, and then reports generated to the regulators showing these adverse events that have happened. So instead now what this organization's doing is to use content intelligence to analyze those documents and pull out such things as who the patient was, what their medical history was, what medications they were taking, in what dosage and what frequency, and how long they've been taken, and what adverse events they experienced as a result. So all of that information can be automatically extracted from the content, fed into the triple store, And then the compliance reports can be generated in a completely automated fashion. So completely wiping out a very manual, laborious, and expensive process. But also as a byproduct, generating a whole new set of data that can be used for analytics and intelligence purposes for this pharmaceutical company. And my last example is in healthcare. Everyone now is interested in the topic of providing proactive healthcare and wellness. In other words, let's stop things going wrong rather than fixing them once they have. And in the US, 1 in 3 people over the age of 75 will have some kind of fall during a year. And in almost half the cases, this will lead to a hospitalization or mobilization, or in some cases worse. It's a very serious issue. So this organization, called Seniorlink, wanted to take on this problem and see what could be done to improve the situation. And so what they did was to try and identify people who might be at risk. And to do that, they needed to combine structured data with unstructured, and internal information with external information. So in order to identify risks, they looked at, for example, clinical trials data available publicly to identify which medications might lead to drowsiness or reduced concentration, which may lead somebody to have some kind of fall or slip. They combined this with medical records of their customers in order to identify people who were on those particular medications. And then combined this with unstructured information from visit reports from nurses and home visits in order to identify other risk factors such as poor lighting, loose rugs, steep stairs, other things that could cause people to have an accident in the home. And also in such things as medical records, you might identify that somebody had an injury that might affect their mobility, and that could then lead to a fall or a slip. So by analyzing all of this information, they're able to identify the patients as at risk and determine proactive changes that could be made. So reaching out to the physician and suggesting, could there be a medication which might not lead to this risk factor that doesn't cause drowsiness or dizziness, for example? Could they provide mobility aids to this individual to reduce the risk? Could there be simple home improvements, improving the lighting, reorganizing rooms, improving the fitment of rugs, things like that, that would reduce these risks? So by taking these measures and targeting them at the people at risk, they're able to improve outcomes for patients and reduce, bad incidents and improve quality of life. So these are all examples from different industries of how people are solving very real problems by using semantics and using content intelligence.
The doctor example where the medication may increase the risk. Is this real time? So the doctor says, okay, great, you're right. Let me plug in this other combination, and do they find out that has resulted in a different problem? Or is the system giving them alternative suggestions that have already been pre-qualified as not having those factors?
It would be great if it was that plugged into the physician process, but at the moment it's more that they identify patients at risk and then have to reach out to the physician and say, look, you've already prescribed this medication. Are there any alternatives that might, prevent this risk? But it would be great if it could take the next step and actually, be on the physician's systems and help them, see the risks in particular things and therefore change their prescription. Yeah.
In this case, it's not that time sensitive. I don't think they're going to follow thinking about it.
Hopefully not. Okay, thanks for the question. All right, so we'd love to talk more about some of these examples, but I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Joe.
Thanks, Toby. And thanks to both of you for inviting me to join you here. We have a really great partnership between MarkLogic and SmartLogic, and I'm happy to be able to just spend a couple of minutes talking about some of the things that we're doing together and why there's such a good fit between our companies and our products. So the really interesting thing that we're talking about here is, you were all at Gary's keynote this morning. Were you all at Gary's keynote this morning? So one of the things Gary said was, a year ago he said, in 3 years, semantics is going to be everywhere. And this year, he said, in 2 years, semantics is going to be everywhere. We're seeing the use of semantics in MarkLogic absolutely burgeon. It's a really, really popular area for us, and I think you can see why based on some of the use cases that Toby just walked through. And what's really interesting from us is we've got this semantics engine, and we've got this great triple store, but the triples have to come from somewhere. We talk about these facts that we store in MarkLogic and that we allow you to query and operate on, but those facts they don't come out of thin air. They have to come from somewhere. And Anne was talking about before the fact that there's all of this incredible content that for decades has been locked into paper. Well, wouldn't it be cool if you could know what that paper actually said and what it meant and what the facts are that are contained in these documents? And actually, whether they're in paper previously or even electronic documents now, you want to be able to unlock those facts and get them into a system like MarkLogic where you can act on them. And that's exactly what this partnership allows us to do. Semaphore is where triples come from. They allow you to take that content, they do that analytics that they've been talking about, they extract these facts, and then we're able to store these facts in MarkLogic, do inferencing on them, and do a lot of the other functions that some of you may have been to some of the other talks on semantics and heard about the kinds of things that you can do once you've got these facts. But what's really key is that combination. What's key is being able to get the facts, unlock that information, and get it into a system that's going to allow you to do something with it. So a lot of great examples Toby was just talking about. Those examples, you wouldn't be able to do anything with them if you weren't able to start by getting the facts into the system. So it's a really, part of the reason why this partnership is so strong is there's really a strong technical synergy between what we do. SmartLogic provides access to the facts. They provide that content intelligence that makes those facts available, and then MarkLogic gives you the power to do some really incredible things with those facts. You can create really powerful search based on those facts and combining those facts with other data that's stored in MarkLogic. You can improve your navigation over the information you have. You can do even greater analytics based on knowledge of what your data really means. You can automate workflows, and we talked about workflows related to a number of cases, including regulatory reporting in the examples that Toby just gave. And that's really just a small set of things that you can do once you've got these facts together in a system that can process them. So tremendous synergy comes from putting these products together. And that really leads to the integration that we've done in integrating the SmartLogic technology with the MarkLogic technology. And it all started with us integrating our names years ago accidentally. But the integration goes far beyond a sort of coincidental naming accident. It really comes with the ability to have a connector between Semaphore and MarkLogic that was developed in concert so we could have the best possible integration between the technologies. So you have everything you need for getting the content intelligence, operating on the data, getting it into MarkLogic, and making it queryable by your applications. So that integration is happening at the connector. It's happening in terms of how we work together with customers. It's also happening in terms of how we're planning our roadmaps and what we're going to do in the future, both individually and jointly, to move this technology base forward. And that's all part of the kind of deep level of partnership that we have between SmartLogic and MarkLogic. So once again, I hope you'll take the opportunity while you're here to talk to Toby and Ann and the SmartLogic team, and also the MarkLogic team, about what we can do with semantics and content intelligence and the combination of those two.
Thank you, Joe. I will say that we have had several customers come to us and suggest that we simply change our collective name to SmarkLogic. We are resisting that at this point in time, but it has been suggested, and we've talked way too long, but I think there may be a couple minutes for questions. Okay. Yes?
I'm curious, the history of SmartLogic, and it looked like all the use cases highlighted triple storage. And did you always use MarkLogic, or did you depart from another triple implementation?
Okay, so the question was, in the history of SmartLogic, did you always use MarkLogic in triple stores, or did you come to this in the fullness of time, essentially? And the answer is that triples is part of what we do. Triples are metadata, okay? And our business since the beginning has been the ability to extract the metadata that says what a particular information asset is about and append it to that asset. Now, we can do that in triples. We can do it with MarkLogic without triples. If you go back to, let's see if I can get this thing to go back. Go back. Aha. Okay. So yes, you can extract triples, and quite frankly, a lot of the folks that we are dealing with now, and a lot of our marquee joint customers are doing this in triples because they've bought into the full semantic web concept, they've bought into RDF, they've bought into RDF, so on and so forth. But we don't just extract triples. You know, we provide annotated content. MarkLogic stores content. You now have access to the metadata, and the content is right there, linked. Okay? We provide all kinds of enriched metadata. So MarkLogic is not the only partner that we work with, but certainly one of the strongest because of the capabilities that they have in enterprise class information management. Semaphore is our product, yes.
That's a data access layer where MarkLogic is one that you've integrated with?
Yes. Yes, we have,
In the past, you've done something else?
not only in the past, but also in the present. We have integrated with MarkLogic as, you know, a triple store and a content store. We have integrated with other content stores, but this is not their conference. This is MarkLogic's conference. Yes? So the question was, what is the lowest level of granularity in the assets that are being managed in Disney's system? Does it go as low as a particular version of a drawing of a character?
Yeah, it does. Well, firstly, just to say that the combined SmartLogic, MarkLogic solution does not store the data asset or the media assets themselves. They are all in other production systems that have necessarily been designed to manage those processes. But yes, absolutely from images and drawings to an episode of a program or a particular scene are managed in those systems. So it's an awful lot of assets in there, and every format that they're going to be delivered in, and every language and every version of them as they go through the process are all stored in those systems. So it's an enormous amount of assets.
You may think it would be really easy to answer a question like, do we have a 3D version of the movie Avatar in Italian, and is it dubbed or subtitled? Turns out that it's really not that easy to answer that question, because the asset's over here, the information about the translation is over there. Being able to pull all of that information together to get a complete picture of the asset, irrespective of its size, is the power that Disney has been given now. Other questions? Yes?
Tell us a little bit about Roadmap. I'm curious about the database that MarkLogic uses. Will it ever use MarkLogic?
Yes. The question was about our roadmaps. We've spent a lot of time, our CTO, just so that you understand, our CTO is French. That creates its own set of issues. But we have worked very, very closely with the MarkLogic team, and yes, we will be using MarkLogic as the data store. We're fundamentally, we don't have a data store. We're a layer of metadata creation. So we can use any number of different stores, but that is clearly one that we are critically interested in industrializing. I'm sorry? It will not eliminate the need for a connector, but it will change the nature of the connector a little bit. Did I say that right, Joe? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right, get out of here.